An in-depth look at the news and information shaping our community. This is Moose Talks with your host, Doug Craig, on Moose FM.
Good morning and Happy New Year to you. Welcome to the first episode of the show for 2023. A little later on, we're going to be talking with Carolyn Turner. She's the managing director of the North Peace Regional Airport. We'll be chatting a bit about the challenges they faced over the holiday season with all the flights delayed out of Vancouver and other places, and sort of what they can do to mitigate that and in that sort of situation. So we'll talk a bit about that in a bit. But first, we've got lots to talk about as per usual on the federal side of politics that affects you here in Northeast BC. So to chat about some of the things that were on the table to end the session in the fall here and what we're looking forward to in the new year, we're joined now by Prince George Northern Rockies MP, Bob Zimmer. Bob, welcome back to Moose Talks.
Good to be back.
I'm glad I nailed your entire title, I think, for the first time ever.
Yeah.
So, Bob, let's talk first with drilling in the Arctic, because that was kind of a really recent news story that came out where you kind of expressed your disappointment in the federal government extending their moratorium on drilling in the Arctic. Can you kind of explain to us why briefly?
Yeah, and I even the word disappointment doesn't really phrase it strongly enough, but it's parliamentary, I suppose, parliamentary language. But no, we just heard that there was an extension. We saw some documentation that came December 15th that said that this is the way they were going. I'd asked the Minister for Northern Affairs that question in committee just prior to Christmas, and he doubled down on the moratorium and no more permitting or drilling to be happening in the Arctic. And I'm not even saying that we should be necessarily doing that, but we should be allowing the territories to make decisions about their resources. We should be letting them make their own decisions on that. And we've seen when the moratorium first was implemented by this Prime Minister that there was consternation from all premiers saying, hey, look, that's our decision to make, not yours. You're supposed to not be paternalistic. That was the whole campaign pitch. But here you go saying, Ottawa knows best, we're going to shut you all down despite what you may want to do and plans you may have. Because we know even in Northwest Territories, there's been some huge exploration for natural gas north of Tuktoyaktuk, and that moratorium has really just been devastating for that community because they had a lot of hope, especially with this LNG and the promise that it can bring down emissions across the globe and benefit Canadians, and especially Northern Canadians who don't always have those opportunities, and just basically kibosh that whole plan. So and this is just to extend that shutting it down. So it's unfortunate. I am more than disappointed, but we need to be doing things that we can to support development in the north, not shut it down.
What do you make of the argument that, first of all, this is, as I understand it, in line with what the U.S. has kept kind of doing in the Arctic, right? And that this is sort of, I don't know, maybe a play to sort of keep them appeased that we're not drilling because you're not drilling, but if that changes, maybe we would change our stance.
Yeah,
too.
I think previous administrations have developed. My uncle used to work up in North Alaska as a Canadian, as a directional driller. So there was, in previous administrations, there was exploration done. And we're talking about responsible resource development here.
Yeah.
We're talking about technology that's second to none in the world. Our workers are second to none in the world. We can go up there and do some really great things for the environment and for our energy. Especially, the situation is especially highlighted when we hear Ukraine, saying we need energy, and the risk of what Russia's doing. Germany needs energy. Really, all of Europe is really under Putin's thumb. We need to give them some options, and we need to think about this further down the road than just the next couple of years. We need to look about how do we be strong geopolitically as an ally to some of these countries we have lots of resources to offer. How about we develop those and make ourselves a player in the global energy community?
Now, you mentioned years to come. I don't have the name of the person in front of me, so I apologize. I'm pulling this quote out of thin air. But the idea that peak demand in oil and gas is going to be coming at some point in the future. But this, even if there wasn't a moratorium on drilling, it's not like development's going to happen tomorrow or next year or the year after. It would take some time for it to happen. What do you make of that notion that by the time we were able to develop anything in the Arctic at this point, we would be past peak demand and we might start to see a slow phase out of oil and gas anyway. What do you
Well,
think of that?
I would ask that same so-called expert, why have we seen, the U.S. Increase their production at record levels of energy? Why are we seeing record production? Why are we seeing Germany develop its own LNG terminals to get energy to their own facility? I think that that's a little bit overstated. I think the energy demand has just been proven to increase. I think where most people are at in Canada, really around the world, is that we need to produce energy. They need energy. We all need energy. But let's do it in the most environmentally, the most responsible, the most ethically way we can. And Canada offers that. So we should be doing it.
Okay. I want to talk about the banning handguns and hunting rifles specifically. I think we talked about this the last time you were here because it was
it's a never-ending thing. Yeah.
Tell us a bit about this bill. I mean, I know you're against it, but there's been more coming out recently about how it will affect lots of people, including I read an article coming out of Nunavut about how this would affect Inuit people and their way of life in that they need rifles to hunt.
Yeah.
How does this first of all affect local gun owners, and do you think the government, especially since there's been other groups coming out saying we have problems with this bill, do you think they're actually going to maybe listen and take some of these concerns to heart?
I don't know. I mean, I read yesterday even their own Liberal MP in the Northwest Territories has said that he has some problems because even the firearms that they're listing is going to be prohibited. The ones that were listed by the Liberal firearms expert, they said it's only being used in safari type situations. Well, they're actually being used to hunt buffalo. They're being used in many other situations that currently, obviously, this government doesn't understand. This is a Liberal MP criticizing his own government, amongst many. Many rural Liberal MPs are concerned where this is going. So I was the one who got the yes out of the Liberal expert because up till then they were denying that hunting rifles were part of this ban. And once I got the yes, it was after my question, the person said yes, then it all really blew up on them, and here we are. I think the fact of the matter is I don't think the Liberal government will stop at just these particular farms and this particular amendment. I think they're coming after all of them. And whether it's hunting rifles, shotguns, lever actions, you name it, I think it's part of their agenda. So again, I think law-abiding firearms owners. This has been our premise, since back in '06 and beyond. Law-abiding firearms owners are not the problem here. We have statistical evidence that crime has been increasing since in 2016 under this government's kind of ideology. Lessening consequences for firearms crimes, while cranking down the screws on law-abiding firearms owners. It's a diversion. I think it's actually making Canadians less safe as a result. We have an expert, Gary Mauser, who's estimated it at $6.7 billion to pull this thing off, the gun confiscation regime, as it's laid out today. And he added another $1 billion for the added amendment. So the amount of firearms that will be added with this amendment, it'll be another $1 billion. And I think that's a light estimate, honestly. I think it's going to be between at least 5 and 10 billion. So that's one thing, people, it's a big number. So what does that mean for safety? Why does that make us more unsafe? It makes us more unsafe because instead of spending those resources wisely, they're spending it on something that doesn't work. So let's spend it on something that does work. I did in committee, just spoke about the numbers. We could hire 10,000 agents, whether they're police officers, border agents, and buy them the equipment they need to scan every container as it comes across the border for that money, that same money. That's for $5 billion. So I even did that conservative estimate. So how about we spend the money in a way that can make a difference, we know will make a difference, rather than spending money that we know isn't making a difference. It just doesn't make sense. And I think the person that might have voted for Justin Trudeau last election, I think they're starting to ask questions about, okay, you've had 7 years now with your ideological a kind of spin on firearms. It isn't working. Our kids are more unsafe as a result of what you're doing. We're looking for an alternative that actually does make us more safe, and we have that alternative.
Is that then what how you would approach the situation? Is you'd spend the money on, as you say, maybe even at the border, increasing the ability of agents or however it would work to scan, to investigate containers that are bringing illegal handguns.
I would even
Canada.
add one thing further, is that once you have those officers or agents, not only they are scanning for firearms, they're scanning for opioids, they're scanning for other illegal things coming into our country that are killing our kids. So it'll have another benefit that goes far beyond just illegal firearms and the impacts of those illegal firearms in Canada. So I think that's an obvious path. Sadly, again, this PM isn't choosing that path. He's choosing to follow along with his ideology. I think the part that I've challenged, and I stood up in the House to challenge the rural Liberal MPs, is I said I didn't even want this question to be answered by the Prime Minister. I want Liberal MPs, the rural MPs, to stand up and answer my question about are they going to stand up for their law-abiding firearms owners in their own communities? And that remains to be seen.
Yeah. Let's move on to something that's a little more good newsy, shall we? The passport office opening in Prince George. I believe as soon as that was announced, you came and said, great news. People won't have to travel as far.
Yeah.
What sort of measurable impact do you think this is going to have? Because I know you've also, for some time, been trying to help people deal with the enormous backlog in getting passports out that kind of has happened since COVID, really.
Yeah, our office deals with that. That's what most, 90% of what we do, my staff does, and all our offices in the constituency is deal with passport applications and deal with a crisis around getting a passport. Some people are trying to travel and they can't. So having this office, our former option was, okay, you have to go to Edmonton or have to go to Vancouver physically and then stand in line and get your passport handed to you, even Ottawa perhaps. So this is a huge positive. We'll see how it works. We hope it works as well as is promised, but it's it's at least alleviates some of the problems that lack of passports being produced, frankly, since 2020, since COVID hit. We've seen huge problems with the passport offices wherever they are. Yeah. So again, it's a real positive.
Are you hoping this is a permanent thing that they do, just like after the backlog and kind of things resume to quote unquote normal, that they would keep this office open for people in the
Yes, I would hope so. I think the population increase in our northern communities warrants it. We're very much, Prince George North, very much a hub for the northern part of the province, even from further north, even into Yukon and other areas. So it's a stop along their way. So, no, I think it's a good thing.
Okay. One final question. We got about a minute left, Bob. Just kind of in the new year, what do you think you're most looking forward to as a member of Parliament, tackling, whether it's something that's ongoing or if there's something new that you think might be coming up that you're just kind of looking to dig into?
Well, there's no shortage of challenges. Right now we're dealing with Canada Post challenges. We've been dealing with the 911 changes, and those who are affected by it know what that is. It's a physical address that's been migrated. Everybody has had to have a physical address now on their postage. That's been hugely problematic for rural residents and still is. And even the implications of what's happened as a result of that, we're still seeing problems from that. But we're seeing even further problems now with shortages of postmasters, rural Canada Post drop places aren't able to find staff. So I'm digging into it. I have been digging into it for a while, but just seeing, is there a lack of funds? Is it, what is the real problem in recruiting? Because recruiting really, staff of any kind is a problem in the north. Really across Canada right now. So we need to dig into that because it's such an important part of our daily lives, is getting that mail and getting mail out as well. So I use the services weekly as everybody. But so that's what we're digging into, and hopefully we can get some solutions for our residents.
All right, Bob. Well, thank you so much for taking some time to chat with us today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, and have a happy new year.
Absolutely. That's Bob Zimmer, the MP for Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies, here on Moose Talks. We'll be right back to the show right after this. Welcome back to the show. I'm Dub Craig. Now we're going to talk all about the North Peace Regional Airport and some of the challenges that airports in general we're facing over the holiday season. We all know somebody who has a story about getting stranded or delayed or whatnot while everyone was dealing with all the snow in Vancouver and places elsewhere. So to talk a bit about that situation and how they handle things here in the North Peace, we're joined now by the managing director of the North Peace Regional Airport, Carolyn Turner. Carolyn, welcome to Moose Talks.
Good morning. Thanks, Dub. Thanks for having me.
Hey, no problem. Thanks so much for being here. So as I mentioned, I mean, we've all been reading the news in the last 2-3 weeks about all the delayed, canceled flights over the Christmas holidays in Vancouver and places elsewhere. Can we talk a bit kind of in general, if you can, a bit about the causes to all these cancellations, delays, and how things were at the North Peace Regional Airport when so many people were trying to get to Vancouver and places elsewhere?
Absolutely. So while I can't speak to the operations at other airports, as we all know from the news and watching the weather, the Vancouver airport and Vancouver as a city experienced quite an anomaly of a snowstorm there right before Christmas. What happens when that occurs, when a weather phenomenon such as that occurs in a place like Vancouver that doesn't have it very often, is that it backlogs everything. So not just planes at their airport, but planes trying to get to their airport are then backlogged at, Calgary, Edmonton, Toronto, any other airports that are trying to come. We also experience some extreme cold weather temperatures, which don't often affect the type of aircraft that we have flying here, the Q400s. But as soon as you get into the larger aircraft that aren't turboprop, they don't like that cold weather as much, and it poses some new challenges. So that caused some issues in Calgary and Edmonton. And then, of course, the East Coast, Ontario and eastward, was also hit with a storm there right around Christmas. And again, that snowball effect happens across the country, if not into the United States and other markets. So really the weather was the cause in this case. What I am happy to report is that the North Peace Regional Airport remained open for business throughout the holidays. We were ready for aircraft to come in or to depart, but it was just a matter of whether the receiving airports or the sending airports were letting the aircraft go.
Were you, how were you dealing with the backlogs here in terms of people waiting to find out if their flights were going to make it or if they were able to land? Because as you say, it was kind of a perfect storm where everywhere was experiencing these delays. So did you have a lot more traffic at various times because there was suddenly more people waiting to find out what was going to happen than maybe you'd experience at a normal Christmas or a holiday time?
Well, it's always a busy time of year. So we're always prepared for that. We do have busier days at the airport. Mondays and Thursdays are quite busy with our charter flights and so on. So did we notice a few more passengers around the terminal? Absolutely. But the communications come from the airlines. Their websites are continuously updated. If they have tickets, then they get text messages, emails, messages on their apps and so on. So what we do as an airport is just ensure that we have the services to support those additional passengers that are in the terminal. Our restaurant was available and open with spicy fusion there on the non-secure side of the airport. And then, of course, in the secure side, for the most part, people weren't going through security because of the flight delays of going out. So I would say that we weren't over full, but it was definitely a busy Christmas period.
Were you finding lots of people were asking questions of you in the airport, like, why is this happening? Why is that? When, again, as you kind of said, not to throw them under the bus, but it was really about the airlines and how they were handling things, again, in other centers.
Sure. Yes, we do get emails and phone calls at the airport, and it's a common misunderstanding that the airports run everything, whereas as we provide the airport itself, the facilities and the means for the airlines to operate their business, and they did a very good job as well. We had right before all these storms, we had those temperatures of minus 49 with the wind chill. We've got people outside handling baggage and what have you, shoveling snow in those temperatures. And so I have to give a lot of credit to the airlines and their contractors for how they handle the winters in Fort St. John.
I wondered if we could just talk quickly about kind of handling winter in Fort St. John. What here at our airport would cause a flight to be canceled? What is there a temperature? Is it everyone has to kind of assess the conditions on the plane and on the runway every time, or is it's minus 50, we got to shut things down? How does that work?
There's never a perfect answer for you that it's
Yeah.
one thing. There's so many variables. The variables can come from the airlines. It can come from the weather. More often than not, it's the weather. So some extreme conditions that make it very difficult are thick fog or extreme fog. In the winter, we see the ice fog. That can be challenging and for aircraft to come in or to take off. Then when the weather gets to a point of extreme cold, then the de-icing fluid that's put on the aircraft before they take off becomes ineffective. So when we get into those really cold temperatures, basically, if the aircraft requires de-icing, it's ineffective and they can't use it. The other weather phenomena that can really affect us is freezing rain. Luckily, we haven't had too much of that this year. We had a little bit of the ice droplets and so on, but not the freezing rain so far that was experienced last winter. What that does is makes it challenging for us at the airport in clearing the runway. So there's only, if there are any, and I don't think there are any chemicals that will work as soon as you get into the minus 35 range to melt the ice or to clear the ice on the runway. So it becomes a manual, very arduous process of scraping the ice off of the surface, which that is like scraping ice off of the windshield of your car. So that job can be very laborious, and our crews do that. But that's the biggest one that could close the airport for flights in and out. But we haven't experienced that so far this year.
All right, well, that's good. With us seeing this extreme weather at the holidays and the likelihood that we're going to see this more and more with climate change and whatnot, is airports like the North Peace Regional Airport, is there preparations in place, plans in place for how we're going to deal with this kind of stuff if we see it happening more and more, and what we can do to make it better for everybody involved, for you, the employees, for the passengers on the flights, for the the workers on the flights and the airlines, to deal with what might be coming a more regular occurrence in the future.
Right. So the nice thing about the Fort St. John Airport is we already are in the north. We already do experience these extreme weather conditions that the south is not as used to as we are. So we already do the prep work. Before the snow flies, we have winter operations meetings. We do training. We check our equipment. We stock, the sand, the de-icing fluid, all up. So we're prepared for when winter hits. And then of course, the things that we can do to prepare for that is, if it looks like we're going to be experiencing more of the more snow, more ice, more of that type of weather, then it means that we up our quantities of our inventory of those types of materials. From a staffing perspective, we're always monitoring the weather, and if it looks like something is coming our way, then we have our existing staff, but we also will call in overtime to make sure that those runways and taxiways are cleared. And also on the ground side of the airport, meaning the walkways, parking lot, and so on. So I would say that we're well positioned, we're well trained, and well prepared for that type of weather already. So if more gets thrown at us, it's just a matter of making sure that we have the materials and the manpower to support that.
Wonderful. Well, Carolyn, I really appreciate you taking a few minutes to chat with us today. Thank you so much for being here.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. That's Carolyn Turner, the Managing Director of the North Peace Regional Airport. Our thanks to our guests Bob Zimmer and Carolyn Turner for joining us today. Make sure you check out the podcast of this show and older episodes now at energeticcity.ca/podcast. You can also listen to episodes of our other podcasts, such as Secrets of the North, all about true crime in the North, and Before the Peace, all about highlighting Indigenous voices from the Northeast section of BC. For your listening pleasure now, head over to energeticcity.ca/podcast. That's our show for today. Trey Lopashinsky and Jordan Prentice are the producers of Moose Talks. I'm Dub Craig. Be well.